Hi, I'm Dan Williams, and you may have received a few emails from me asking you to come along to our Appathon kickoff event today. And I'm extremely pleased at the turnout, although this half of the room is quite quiet now. But, thanks so much for coming and supporting us. As it's been mentioned, it's the first one it's the first one that's been set up by GEO, and I hope it's got a great future, and I hope that with all the feedback and the information we can make this a very cool and useful and worthwhile event. So I'm going to quickly go through maybe what could be classed as very boring, but it's almost like the planning, how to design an app. And I thought this was a very good quote by someone from Apple who said that design is a funny word, and some people think that design means how it looks. But of course, if you dig deeper, it's really how it works. And I think that's the key to when someone who's creating any piece of software, even a very simple app, should focus on. In fact, focusing on how it works can make the whole thing more simple and make it work very well and make it very useful. So I'm going to cover what is an app. It can cause some confusion, and it has already caused lots of confusion. So I'm just going to go over what that is. What's a GEO Appathon app? How to design an app, and then we're going to have that little workshop session with everyone that's going to hopefully answer some of those questions for us. So what is an app? It's an application, hence app, but an app is something that's designed for a mobile device, a tablet device, or some newfangled Google glasses perhaps. It's not a desktop-heavy application, type of application. So the key word there is mobile, and for sort of mobile devices. I thought it was quite interesting to just pull up two examples of very, very, very popular apps. You can see Doodle Jump, which I've never played, but apparently that is the most downloaded paid-for app on the iPhone store. So there's a good example of the best app ever, apparently. On the other side, which I think is very relevant for this community, the second most free downloaded app on the Windows Phone App Store is an application called Here Maps, which is created by Nokia. And it's their mapping application, and that has a few different layers. It's essentially a Google Maps, but for Nokia. So Earth observation data is very relevant already in the app mobile device world, and hopefully we can take that inspiration and start creating something more. What's a GEO Appathon app? As Pete mentioned, there's a lot of rules and regulations, I think about 4 on our website, so it's not that constrained, but for very generally, the GEO Appathon app should be based around all the stuff you've heard already about the GEOS portal and all of the API sort of stuff. When we're talking about a GEO Appathon app, the more data sets you can have, the better we will score it. And the scoring criteria will be published on our website later on today as well. So you'll get more kind of concrete information around that. As we've discussed, there are 9 different GEO thematic areas, and the app should be aligned to those areas to make it, a worthwhile app for us at GEO and the Appathon. They're quite wide-ranging areas, so hopefully it will be quite easy to fit an app into that. So very, very, very quickly about how to approach designing an app. My initial career was as an SAP application consultant, and I had to design applications for businesses, and it was very, very boring. Hence, that's why I'm here now. And when I was there, I did get taught something useful, and that's this classic waterfall design model. This you should never use to design an app. but the fundamentals of each of those steps should definitely be considered when creating any piece of software, and especially an app. The reason is it kind of hones the app to make it useful, to make it relevant. It's not that you have to go through each of these steps sequentially, perhaps, and that kind of methodology, if you're very interested, is called an agile methodology, where you can sort of consider each of these points and keep going back to them, keep making sure you've got a handle on what's important for the app. So very briefly, I'm just going to go through each of those sections and give you a very sort of brief few words about what that means. So on the inspiration, requirements and analysis stage, I think the first thing to do for your app is to be inspired. And we've tried to drum up some inspiration today from our very interesting presenters. And every time I look at maps, just generally, I get quite excited. So I just really wanted to show you this very, very quickly. A small app that I found on the internet. I just stumbled across it. It's a visualization of wind data, up-to-date wind data, and it forecasts it for the next 3 hours. It doesn't do anything, but it's very nice to look at, and it's using loads of big data. And I think this is a great, great visualization of what the problem is for our Appathon. I want someone to create an app from this. I've got a few ideas about why I could use this on my mobile phone, but it needs to be someone needs to do it. So that's what I like to look at when I'm trying to be inspired. So back to the presentation. The next part, which is a bit boring, is about requirements specification. An app is only useful if it fulfills a requirement. Many people can have many good ideas, but if it doesn't fulfill someone's requirement somewhere, it's pointless, such as that visualization we just saw. It's great to look at, but what exactly does it do, apart from if the requirement was I want something nice to look at? And it does fulfill that requirement. But an app to be useful, and that's what we're judging in the GEO Appathon, needs to be useful, and it needs to be aligned to those thematic areas. So understanding requirements, gathering requirements, they can be very simple, but that's certainly a very important stage. And next is analysing the data. We've heard that there's a lot of data, but we've also heard it's very complex. And the importance of knowing what data you've got and knowing how you can combine it and whether it's possible right now is very important. So it's good to understand exactly what you're doing before you design your app. So next comes design, coding and testing, which is the techie bit of doing an app. Within the design stage, you have what's called logical design, which is the look and the feel and how it will work. So you can do things like use case studies, which sort of say how the app will look and feel. But then, just as important, you've got physical design of the app. And those 5 key points of input, output, storage, processing and management requirements of the app should totally be taken into consideration. Not in a big, boring document, but just to think about it and make sure that it's being considered is important. Obviously, the next part is the coding part, and I'll leave that to the very technical people that know what they're doing. But these points, I think, should always be taken into consideration when doing an app. If you don't take into consideration the usability of an app, no one will use it, and it won't be considered useful. So they should be those points should be taken into consideration. And finally, on this section is testing, and that's quite boring, but it's so important to make sure the app works in many different scenarios with stress testing, so getting loads of data into the app if that's what you're doing, or testing it on a mobile network in Switzerland if you can. So testing it, making sure it works, so that when we come to judge the app, it does what it says it's going to do. And the final small stages of designing an app is the acceptance and maintenance. sets of requirements. And that's all about how to deploy the app, make sure that it gets out, gets marketed, and that's hopefully where we can, in the Appathon, assist with deploying the app out. If it's useful, it will be deployed wide and marketed well. And maintenance as well. If things go wrong, be prepared to fix it, to do something with it, or to respond to issues. And that's about it for designing an app. That's my sort of very quick go-through of a very boring process. But hopefully it's a good overview, and it's good to keep that into consideration when designing an app. And even if you're not a developer, which I know most people aren't right now, it's good to have that way of thinking, I think, embedded in how you're thinking about apps. And if we're looking at apps in the future, or even judging an app or commenting upon an app, it's good to keep those points in mind, and maybe even give that advice out to people you know doing the Appathon also. So next, it's our ideas workshop. And this is where we want to harvest your brain matter.
The collective intelligence of the room.
Exactly.
Brilliant. Before we do that, actually, Dan, I know we've not discussed this. You developed an app for Microsoft. So Dan, whilst being the founder of Qingtech, he was Microsoft's UK environmental technologist for the last few years. Now also has a global role inside Microsoft, helping them understand the impact of their technologies. You developed a really simple app, which now is being picked up by their sales force on the impact of Windows 8 and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Is it on that? Can you show it on that PC?
Yes.
Just as a really simple use of data that Dan's harvested a bucket load of data from within Microsoft, and what he can quickly show is if you choose a company of a particular size, you can move a couple of really simple levers, if you like, to basically compare the energy consumption of a business that's using Windows 7 versus Windows 8, or laptops versus desktop computing, which is just really simple stuff. But if you're the guy or girl that has to procure these bits of hardware or software, you can start to see the massive difference in energy levels. Dan, just as a really quick overview, just to bring an app process to life, if you like. Could you show it?
Yeah, certainly. So maybe Windows 8 apps, for example, are one of the operating systems that can be coded for. Not very popular with many people, but this is an app that I obviously did for Microsoft. It's very commercial, let's not get that wrong, but the requirement was for it to be a sales tool to promote the environmental features of Windows 8, the new version. So this is the app opening up. It's extremely simple. It's meant for salespeople to go to customers and say, you must, you want to upgrade from an old version of Windows, so we'll click on the center tile there. It just says, how many Windows PCs have you got? So let's say 9,000. What kind of screens do you use? And you can just be very simple and drag that. You can say how many laptops or desktops or tablets you've got. And then, of course, the crucial thing at the bottom is what version of Windows do you use? So let's say they used Windows XP. And at the top there, it estimates through the academic and scientific modelling that I did exactly the energy costs and the emissions and then the equivalents of that energy consumption, just very simply. Then you can say, oh, well, I want to upgrade to Windows 8, and you should hopefully see those energy costs go down quite significantly. It's really simple, but it's been now used by all of Microsoft sales teams as a nice thing to have, and it increases environmental sustainability too.
And the crazy thing about that app was that they're sat on the data. This is information they had at their fingertips, but it took some papers that Dan and people like Dan and people like myself pulled together to say, well, here's the academic models, here's the rigorous way of looking at that, and then a really simple application layer to then translate that. And but what was really interesting was the people at Microsoft didn't know they had a headache until we showed them what's possible with the data. So sometimes going to a user or a group of potential customers and saying, you know, what's your problems? I might be able to solve them. Sometimes people don't know they've got a problem until you can present a solution. So there's a bit of a really interesting thing about innovation here, is sometimes you don't know what you want until you've got it.